I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. We have some really interesting topics today. We got a different kind of lineup. I like it.
We do. A lot of variety for everybody. Glad to have you all with us today. If you're joining us via Zoom, welcome. You can use the chat function to interact with us. And if you're on YouTube, you can interact with us via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu and respond that way. But glad to have everybody with us today. We've got a reoccurring guest as well as a brand new guest. It's always exciting when we get somebody brand new on From the Woods Today, and we're really excited to have a new representative from the Kentucky Division of Forestry who's going to be working with us a little bit later, and Maddie Herida, as she is going to be talking about some prescribed fire workshops. We have a brand new Tree of the Week. Laurie Thomas has been in for us, and we'll see that as well. And then we have our very own Dr. Jacob Muller, who's talking about carbon markets. You know, there's a lot of interest in carbon markets and how trees play in that. And Dr. Muller's been following that for us, and he's going to be providing some more information on that. So I'm really excited to have everybody with us today and glad to have you all here today as well. So thank you.
Sure. Let's go ahead and get started. So Dr. Muller, if you'd like, welcome to the show. We appreciate you being on again.
Thanks, Renee. It's great to be here. Great to see you, everyone.
So you're going to tell us about carbon markets. What exactly is that? I mean, for someone who has no earthly idea what you're talking about, what are you going to be talking about?
Yeah, so carbon markets, and what I'm going to be talking about today is with respect to forests and forest management, and how woodland owners and landowners can join these marketplaces, get potentially paid for sustainably managing their lands to promote carbon on the landscape. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about that, kind of what the market is, what's driving that market, and just kind of a little update. I know this is kind of a reoccurring theme for a lot of woodland owners, and it's just changing all the time. And so kind of keeping up to date with that is certainly a full-time job.
Dr. Muller, we appreciate that. Really, you doing that. It's important because there are always lots of questions about this from landowners. So I appreciate you keeping us up to speed.
Yep. Okay. Thanks again, Billy and Renee. It's great to see all of you here this morning on From the Woods Today. Again, I'm going to be talking about carbon markets, and this is just kind of a 101, right? I have about 15 or 20 minutes, and there's a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So this just kind of scratches the surface of what we're talking about. And each part that I'm talking about, there's a lot more involved, a lot more information available, and I'll provide some links at the end that you can click on, or you can jot down and find more information. And just know that this is kind of an ongoing program, one that myself and Jordan Shockley over in Ag Economics here at the university are building writing a number of publications and building out some programming on this. So lots of information to come on this particular topic. So why are we talking about carbon? I think that's an important question to ask, and it's quite simple, really. It's complex, but the answer is simple, and that's because the connection between the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and global temperatures. We know that as carbon increases in the atmosphere, the temperature also follows suit. And with increasing temperatures, there's a lot of other implications and a lot of effects that result from a warming climate. And I'm not going to go into all of that. I'll save that for another date. But just know that this is why we're talking about carbon and carbon markets that are available to woodland owners as a mitigative tool for climate change. So what is driving these markets? Right? There's two broad categories for carbon markets here in the U.S. and really globally. There's compliance markets, and these are state government greenhouse gas regulations, right? These are requirements that are put in place, or regulations put in place by the government. And here in the U.S., an example of that is California's cap and trade program. Looking globally, there's a number of countries that have put into place these compliance markets, right, where companies have to monitor and regulate their carbon footprint. Right? There's other countries across the globe that are beginning kind of the development of these compliance markets, and others where it's just kind of beginning. But here in the U.S., for the most part, we have what's known as a voluntary market. Right. And this structure is really corporate America and its goals around sustainability, reporting, and its overall efforts to help reduce the amount of carbon. Right. And there's a number of reasons for that. But you see a lot of these Fortune 500 companies, some of the biggest companies here in the U.S. that have pledged these carbon footprint or carbon neutral goals, or net zero goals is kind of a word that we see a lot, right? Net zero, that means that the amount of carbon that is being released as part of that company's operations is being offset somehow, right? And it's kind of a balance between these companies trying to reduce the amount of carbon that they're emitting, at the same time trying to enter into a marketplace where they can purchase these carbon offsets, right? And those offsets have to come from somewhere, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. But what drives those companies to enter into a carbon market, right? A big reason for that is consumer demand. Right? The conscious consumer, social values, the values that the customers for these markets place, right? That they place in the company that they want to do business with or purchase products from. And what drives those values typically is the shareholders, right? And there's all sorts of different pieces to this and what's driving these markets. But in the voluntary marketplace, it's really consumer driven motivation for these companies to offset or reduce or mitigate the amount of carbon that they're entering into. So the basic structure, let's, for example, say my woodland. This is a completely fictional farm, but just for the purposes of an example, let's say the Muller Woodland Farms. I've got a woodland that I'm currently managing or trying to develop a management plan for that woodland. And I've been learning about these carbon markets and knowing that that's a value that I share in trying to mitigate or reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And so I decide to enter into a market. Right. And so there's kind of this middle person, this aggregator, and this is where the carbon programs fit in. And I'll mention a couple of these carbon programs today, but really their job is there's a business, right, is to kind of be this broker of carbon between the seller, so the landowner that's growing the carbon or storing the carbon, and these large businesses that I just mentioned, and them trying to meet their own corporate goals, right? Those net zero goals, right? And so a big part of the marketplace is these aggregators in how they define what a carbon credit is and how they determine the potential to store a carbon credit, right? What is a carbon credit? It's defined as a metric ton of carbon, right? And that's kind of a somewhat ambiguous term, but that is the amount of carbon that is being removed or retained in a forest or a woodland. Some of the key characteristics of every carbon market, right? And these are requirements for compliance. I shouldn't say compliance because in the voluntary market, but these key themes of a carbon market. So additionality, right? It needs to be adding the amount of carbon that's being stored. Right? So business as usual isn't necessarily adding anything. So a change in the way that we manage in order to retain more carbon or sequester more carbon. Right. The second part is verification. There needs to be some system in place to verify how the carbon is being accounted and aggregated into these marketplaces. And there's a number of different companies that act as these verification or they serve this role as verification. One of the larger ones is called Vera. A number of the aggregators that we're going to be talking about use one of these four verification companies, really, and Vera is probably the number one most used verification. Permanence, right? This can't be a temporary fix, right? There needs to be some permanence to the carbon that's being restored or that's being stored or sequestered out of the atmosphere and into the forest. And so that means oftentimes these markets span a number of years, oftentimes decades, to have some quantifiable impact in the amount of carbon that's being stored. And this exclusive, this means that you can't sell one carbon credit to multiple marketplaces, right? That one carbon credit is one credit and one credit only. So these are kind of the key characteristics of carbon. So this show is from the woods today. I work in forestry. And so obviously we're talking about this, or at least I'm talking about this in the context of forest and forestry and forest management. So how does this translate to on the ground practices? Right? Forests have perfected, right, the carbon capture as part of this carbon cycle. We see these large companies, right, especially these large energy companies and oil and gas companies that are developing these technologies to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and bury it deep in impermeable layers of the earth, often spending billions of dollars to do that. And that might be an important part of this overall mitigation effort. But forests, most of the carbon is being captured and stored in forests and other ecosystems, vegetative ecosystems. Okay? Forestry is an established science. Most forests and forest types have quite a bit of knowledge built into those, or the forest and the professionals understanding how to sustainably manage those systems. The opportunity for long-term storage, right? And this fits in with that idea of permanence. Obviously, it's not a permanent thing, but a long-term storage. And there's all sorts of secondary benefits of thinking about forests as part of this carbon mitigation tool, right? Oxygen, when we're managing for sustainable forests, the biodiversity, other opportunities. So these co-benefits that exist when we might be managing in the context of carbon, right? To quickly back up, so I talk about this a lot, and I know I shouldn't assume everybody understands how the carbon cycle works and how carbon is pulled out of the atmosphere and kind of magically stored in a tree. But it is quite magical. It's through this process called photosynthesis, right? Where CO2 in the atmosphere, so that carbon, right, is pulled out of the atmosphere through the stomata and the trees and in it, along with water absorbed through the roots to create sugars. Right? So we have this 6 CO2 molecules and 6 water molecules, and this photosynthesis process has created sugar and oxygen. Right, these are the 2 products that we get when we combine the CO2 and the water through this photosynthesis process. And you can see there's that carbon and that sugar, right? And those sugars is what the tree uses to grow, right? To accumulate biomass in the woody materials and in the roots and even in the leaves, right? And so that's where that carbon goes, right? From the atmosphere into the tree. And all plants do release some CO2 through respiration and decay, but a lot of that is stored in the tree. This figure here kind of shows the allocation of that carbon in a tree, with a lot of that in the trunk and in the branches, up to 40% of the carbon, but a majority of that goes into the forest soils, and then just 1% of carbon in the leaves, and that's really a much shorter term storage of carbon, right? As those grow and the leaves fall and decompose and release that carbon. So a big part of what we're talking about, at least on the forest management side, is thinking about that carbon in the woody biomass of that tree. Right? So the wood is the #1 carbon stock, and that's this long-term, potentially this long-term storage. In the roots, again, a long-term storage, and then the leaves and this shorter-term storage of carbon. So thinking back to our forestry and our forest management and how to grow this carbon as it relates to the carbon markets, one of the first components of that is keeping forests as forests. Right? This is an important consideration. Right? There's all sorts of land use changes that have occurred in the U.S. Over the last many hundreds of years, changing from forest to agriculture, and we're seeing some of that land being reforested back into forest. By keeping forests, protecting the health of the forest, encouraging growth, right, through sustainably managing the forest. So this kind of goes hand in hand with forest health, maybe reducing the amount of competition from invasive plants, to controlling the spacing and the growth dynamics of the individual tree to encourage growth. Because when you're encouraging growth, you're also accumulating more carbon in the tree, and sustainably managing the forest. And this could mean a number of things. It could mean managing the forest for the future. So thinking about how the forest today will grow in the future and how we might use certain adaptation strategies to ensure that the forest today grows in the future, or at least functions in the future. Okay. So keeping forests, building relationships with the forest as a landowner, planning for the future, preventing subdivisions, and development truly is the largest threat to many forests, and creating financial incentives, right? And this could include a balanced approach to forest management, harvesting, and carbon credits. And luckily, a number of the carbon markets allow for some sort of forest management and harvesting to control those aspects or those dynamics of the forest. Right? But it's important to know that not everywhere should be forested. There's a lot of initiatives right now that I think it's called like the Trillion Tree Initiative, or planting trees. And planting can be an important part, but it's not a panacea to the climate crisis and mitigating the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So being thoughtful in what is planted, what species is planted, and where. Right? And when we fail at that, we're actually reducing or we're increasing the amount of CO2 that's being released. It might introduce invasives, change ecosystems, and create other problems. Right? Protecting forest health, again, keeping out invasives, watching for pests, and responding quickly to threats. This kind of hypothetical model is based on a managed forest, right? So maintaining the growth, right? And that might mean periodic entries into the forest to thin the forest, to increase the growth of trees, while at the same time thinking about keeping old growth intact, or those characteristics of old growth intact, while maximizing the growth of the forest. Right? As foresters, this might mean slightly different practices to account for that additionality, right? Not just managing as business as usual, but thinking about how we might manage to be additive to the amount of carbon. That might mean thinking about changing our rotations and how long we might maintain a cohort, or whatever that forest might look like. Managing that forest on longer rotation, managing for long-lived species, minimizing the amount of disruption, particularly to the soil, where we know that the majority of the forest carbon is stored, and limit damage, right? So these are kind of these four principles that I usually talk about when talking about sustainably managing forests, because sustainably managing forests is truly a carbon-focused management. So going back to these aggregators, right, these marketplaces, we really only have a few options for smaller woodland owners, at least here in Kentucky. Right? I've talked about these a number of times, and I'll quickly touch base on them. But as I mentioned at the beginning, these markets and kind of the language in these markets is continually changing, and it's kind of hard to keep track of, right? As a landowner, it's really important to be really diligent and considerate before you enter into any sort of contract with any of these markets. And that might mean reaching out to a lawyer or someone who's very familiar with these contracts to understand the fine print. Right? Most of these programs historically have been set up for larger land holdings, typically over 1,000 acres, which a majority of landowners in Kentucky have much smaller land holdings. So recently there's been a focus to be able to increase the access for smaller landowners, anywhere from 25 acres up to 500 or even 1,000 acres, to try to increase the access of these programs. One of the most common ones that we see landowners entering into is a market called NCX, the Natural Capital Exchange. And I will admit that this particular marketplace is currently undergoing some changes. Right? This was originally created as a timber deferment, so a 1-year contract with this company to agree to not cut your trees, and then they would pay you essentially to not harvest your forests. Right? And they had a number of remotely sensed tools that would be able to assess or estimate the amount of carbon on your forest, and then come to an agreeable payment for per acre. And the latest information I've seen is there's been a shift in this company moving away from these 1-year contracts and moving more into these longer term 20 to 60, even 80-year contracts. Right? And then the other one that we're seeing interest in this smaller landowner group is the Family Forest Carbon Program. And this is a program that is supported by the American Forest Foundation, along with the Nature Conservancy and the Audubon Society, that has developed this marketplace, so acting as an aggregator to allow landowners to enter in to these markets while still managing the forest, managing their forest. So having an allowable cut up to a certain percentage of the amount of volume in your forest, and even a program to help reforest or enhance future forests. So these are, and I'll mention that this Family Forest Carbon Program isn't yet available in Kentucky. The last I heard, it was going to be available this year. And doing a quick search right before today's little presentation, I still haven't seen any new updates on when this will officially be available to landowners here in Kentucky. The NCX is currently available here in Kentucky, along with some other programs. But those are kind of the two primary ones. Then when you get into the larger land holdings, then you kind of have access to a number of these other marketplaces, but I'm not going to go into any detail with that. Right. So just to quickly wrap up, the Family Forest Carbon is practice-based, longer contracts, payments over the course of the contract, generally a 30-acre minimum. It allows harvesting, which is really the point, was the goal for this Family Forest Carbon Program, was to encourage management while still trying to promote carbon in the forest. And then NCX, which has historically been a timbered ferment. So that's their way of addressing the additionality, is to defer a harvest in order to retain that carbon in the forest. And there will be some updates on this company and this market, I'm sure, very soon. Right, so just some final thoughts. The markets are continually developing in the voluntary corporate commitments. These new programs continue to launch. Right? There's continually new programs entering, and the existing ones are changing. It's kind of the Wild West in these voluntary markets, and it can be quite confusing for landowners. It can be quite confusing to everybody involved, including myself. And so staying up to date with these markets is really important. Read the fine print if you're a landowner, ask questions, and seek out legal advice. And I can't reiterate that enough. This is a legal contract, and when you're talking about 30 to 60 plus years, that's a commitment, whether it's you or your family generations down the road. Right? But ultimately, and I would argue that just sustainably managing our forest is kind of the first key aspect to retaining carbon in the forest. And so there's a number of co-benefits. And so just thinking about how we can sustainably manage our forest is one of the first steps that we should be taking when we're thinking about carbon in this greater context of changing climates and mitigation. And so promoting and sustainably managing our forest has all these other benefits and can help reduce the atmospheric carbon. How you enter into that marketplace is a challenging and confusing thing right now, but hopefully with help from folks with a forester that you might seek advice from, you can come to determine what might be best for you in the way that you manage your own woodland. And okay, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there. I meant to put my email address, but it's just jacob.muller@uky.edu. If you do have any questions, and I'd be happy to send you additional materials or just answer questions.
So there were a couple of questions. One is the carbon in lumber says it's used to build homes permanently captured?
It's not permanently captured, but it is a long-term store of carbon that's not necessarily being accounted for in carbon marketplaces. And this is actually an area that's being quite heavily researched, trying to understand that carbon as it moves from the forest into perhaps a green building product that might be stored for many decades or centuries. And so it's an important consideration. It's not necessarily being considered in that carbon market, but I think in the future that is going to be a much bigger consideration of how we retain that carbon storage in forest products.
Okay. The next one was, do these programs set limits on how recently a forest can have been forested in order to enter into carbon credits?
It depends. It depends on the market. I know that folks have thought about kind of skirting around this forest retention by doing all their management ahead of time and then entering into the market after they've done that. And that's not necessarily how that works, because it is based on the amount that's currently there and the potential for the carbon to remain there in the forest.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Billy.
no, I was just gonna say, unfortunately, that's the way most of the timber sold in Kentucky, right? You know, after they basically sell the timber and then sell the land, or
Yeah, and there are incentives to, especially with the Family Forest Carbon Program, to promote future forests. And so it's almost kind of like a incentives program to offset some of the costs to promote those future forests. So regeneration and helping develop the forest into healthy forests of the future.
And there was one more. It was, how complicated is it for landowners to get info and work toward this agreement?
I guess if you couldn't tell, it can be a
it's a
complicated
moving target, you know, it's like, whoop.
Yeah. And I guess the fact that we haven't had many options here means it hasn't been as complicated, because really NCX has kind of been the main company that most landowners have gravitated to here. And so the process of going and entering in your information and your the kind of the boundaries of your land, and then they go and assess it all, and they'll determine whether you're whether you'll be I don't know, have access to these markets or not. And so, and it's not really clear what how they make those determinations if you're eligible or not. I will say, with some more marketplaces opening up, there is going to add some complexity, because you'll have more decisions in what's best for you, thinking about these longer term contracts that might pay out kind of over the long term, or these kind of shorter term commitments. And so it can be complicated, but I think over time, the foresters here in the state are learning more and more about it, and they'll be a great resource to help you as these questions come up, and how this carbon piece fits into your overall management plan. So
I was gonna say, fortunately, we have Dr. Moeller out there keeping tabs on what's going on for us, because, you know, it is tough to keep up with. And I know people, you know, they want to have good information to make some of these long-term decisions. So the work that you're doing and keeping us abreast of what's happening and how things change is absolutely critical. So Jacob, thank you for that very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I feel like I'll probably be on every 6
Well,
months.
I think it's important, right? We want to help our landowners out there in Kentucky make well-informed decisions that are a good fit for them and what they're trying to do with their properties. So, no, we
Yeah.
need you. We need the work that you're doing, and they need you. So, thank you very much.
Kind of the whole point of the show, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so we appreciate you being
yeah,
on,
yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, good to see y'all.
All right, come back soon. Yes, excellent. Well,
All right,
very good segment, Renee, and very important for a lot of our woodland owners here in Kentucky and really throughout the nation and around the world. So, yeah,
definitely.
stay tuned as it's a very
tuned.
ever evolving thing that we're dealing with. But all right, we're going to stay with trees though. We are going to switch to a tree of the week. Laurie Thomas put together this tree of the week I'm about to show. Unfortunately, Laurie is teaching a bunch of children.
Not here, but that's
Not
okay.
here about the importance of our forests here in Kentucky. So, Laurie, thank you for all you do. And Renee, I guess without any further ado, I'll go ahead and get it playing.
Sure. If you have any questions, though, we do have some other people that might be able to answer them. So just put them in the chat pod.
I'm Laurie Thomas with the University of Kentucky Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, and I'm here with the tree of the week, the cherry bark oak. Cherry bark oak, Quercus pagoda, is a highly desirable timber tree of the southeastern United States. It is a member of the red oak group and is one of 13 red oak species found in Kentucky. It is also known as swamp red oak, swamp Spanish oak, and Elliott oak. Cherry bark oak is one of the largest of the southern red oaks, and it typically grows 100 to 130 feet tall and 36 to 60 inches in diameter. It's a fast-growing tree that has regular branching which forms a broad, round canopy, and the trunk is relatively branch-free as compared with other bottomland red oaks like pin oak and willow oak, and this good straight form adds to its timber value. Its acorns are also a valuable wildlife food, and it makes a fine shade tree in large urban areas. Cherry bark oak's native range is along the Atlantic and Gulf coastal plain from Virginia to Texas and north along the Mississippi River Valley to southern Illinois. It is found in extreme western Kentucky. It's a bottomland species that grows in well-drained, loamy sites along both large and small streams. Cherry bark oak is classified as shade intolerant. The leaves are deciduous and alternately arranged on the twig, and the leaf form is simple, as you can see in the photo. They are 5 to 8 inches long with 5 to 9 bristle-tipped lobes, and the sinuses between the lobes tend to be shallower than southern red oaks. The bristle-tipped lobes are a good characteristic to distinguish red oaks from white oaks, which have rounded lobes. The leaves are bright green above and duller and somewhat scruffy below, and fall color ranges from yellow to reddish to brown. Cherry bark oak is monoecious like other oaks, which means a tree will have both male and female flowers. The male flowers are yellow-green and borne on elongated clusters of catkins, which you can see in the photo. The female flowers are very small, greenish, and borne in short stalks in the axil of the leaf. The flowers emerge with the leaves in spring, and the flowers are wind-pollinated. The fruit is a smallish acorn that's about a ½ inch long, and it tends to be orange-brown in color with a slight fuzz on it. The acorn cap covers about 1/3 of the nut. The acorns mature after the second growing season between August and November, like other red oaks. The acorns are disseminated largely by hoarding animals such as gray squirrels and occasionally by water and gravity. Cherry bark oak begins seed production around 25 years of age, with best production between 50 and 75 years. And trees typically have good seed crops every 2 years. The bark is smooth on young trees, but develops small, scaly ridges very quickly as the tree begins to grow. The bark becomes darker and more scaly and rough as the tree ages, and some bark may even resemble the bark of black cherry. The wood of cherry bark oak has many of the same traits as northern red oak, Quercus rubra. It's heavy and strong and an excellent timber tree. It's light to medium reddish-brown in color, although there can be a lot of variation in that color, and it has a fairly coarse grain. It has medium to large pores and is ring porous with large spring or early wood pores and small summer or late wood pores, and tyloses does not form in these pores as it does with white oaks, and thus red oaks do not have the same level of decay resistance. The wood is used for cabinetry, furniture, interior trim, flooring, and veneer. As with other oaks, cherry bark is an excellent tree for wildlife. The acorns make up at least 10% of the diet of many species of mammals and birds. Mammals include gray squirrels, raccoons, and deer. And the birds that rely on cherry bark oak include blue jays, nuthatches, red-bellied and red-headed woodpeckers, wild wood duck, wild turkey, and grackles. Oaks also support a variety of lepidopteran larval species such as the imperial moth, banded hairstreak, and dusky wings. The national champion cherry bark oak, as of 2021, is in Portsmouth, Virginia. It's 331 inches in circumference, 114 feet tall, with a 138-foot crown spread. The Kentucky champion is in Ohio County, and it's 287 inches in circumference, 132 feet tall, with a 107-foot crown spread. If you'd like to know more about champion trees, check out American Forest National Champion Trees, or check out the Kentucky Division of Forestry Champion Trees. Now for a few fun facts about cherry bark oak. Cherry bark oak is often considered a variety of southern red oak, Quercus falcata variety pagodafolia. It has been reported that cherry bark oak decomposing leaves release an allelopathic leachate which can inhibit the growth of surrounding vegetation. The scientific name for cherry bark oak, Quercus, is Latin for the oak, and the specific epithet pagoda refers to the appearance of the leaf when it is viewed with the leaf tip pointed towards the ground. From this perspective, the angle of the lobes resemble the overlapping roof of a pagoda. Thank you for joining me to learn about cherry bark oak, and I hope you get the opportunity to get out into your woodland, a local park or neighborhood, and enjoy the terrific trees of our environment.
You know, I look forward to every time she has one of those because I learned so much, and there were so many interesting facts in that, that I had never heard before. So, but I guess you won't find those around Lexington, though. Is that right?
Not unless they're planted, I mean, naturally occurring, probably not. They're
But
more.
you could plant it, and it would.
Oh yeah, and we have them
fun.
here on campus. They're all
Oh,
over
okay.
campus as well. So yeah, there's lots of them. It's a really cool tree. It really is. Just one of our many cool oaks, and we got
So
a lot
there's
of them.
several. There's several out there, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I think she mentioned 13 different red oaks we
Right.
had out there in the
Exactly.
state. So yeah, no, appreciate Laurie putting those together. Those were always such a big hit, and like you said, I really enjoy them too. Always learn something. I had a chance when I was in college to be a teaching assistant for dendrology. So it's the study of trees. But I must tell you, Laurie always reminds me of stuff I'd forgotten or stuff maybe I never knew in the first place. So really appreciate Laurie for doing those.
But there's a whole lot to remember on every tree. So
Yes, there is. Yeah, there's a lot of detail there, but no, she does great
exactly.
with them. Yep. Hey, I just remind folks, if you all have not seen those, she has like 80 plus of these already posted on our website. So if you like these, you can go to town on them for sure.
Go to fromthewoodstoday.com and you can find every
Yep.
single one of them.
Yep,
So
no doubt.
binge watch.
Get your tree needs met. Yes.
Okay. So speaking of which, we have one more guest. Maddie, if you want to go ahead and turn your camera on, we would appreciate you being on today. And she's going to talk about prescribed fire and some webinars and events that they're going to have.
I know. So excited, Maddie. Welcome to From the Woods today. So delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And I know I was having some microphone technical difficulties. You can hear me now?
You sound good. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'll go ahead and share my screen real quick.
Wonderful.
Awesome. So my name is Maddie Heredia. I am the Prescribed Fire Program Coordinator with the Kentucky Division of Forestry. And I'm here today as a representative from the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council. And this group is a group of fire practitioners in the state, prescribed fire practitioners that are made up of state agencies, federal agencies, nonprofit, private consulting, private landowners, and a bunch of other stakeholders that are interested in prescribed fire and its use within the state. So before jumping into these amazing field trips and webinars that we have, I wanted to give you all a little background about who we are and what we do. The Fires Council mission is to promote the understanding and enhance collaboration for the use of ecologically based prescribed fire in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And so what do? We protect and advance the use of controlled burning to manage our lands. We coordinate and exchange information related to controlled burning throughout the state. We promote the safe use of controlled burning through training and other certification programs that we offer. We promote public awareness on the benefits of controlled burning. We advance cooperation among all parties in Kentucky directly or indirectly involved with the use of controlled burning. And we share information obtained through research and monitoring on our website and with our partners. And so for those of us here that are completely new to prescribed fire, I thought I'd throw in this little insert on what prescribed fire is. It is good fire. It is not wildfire. It is the use of fire to meet specific objectives with a specific plan to restore or maintain habitat or a certain ecosystem. And with each prescribed fire, a lot of planning goes into it. So there's a prescription set that has kind of a guideline for the parameters of the weather and the fuel conditions on whether or not we can burn. So it's a very detailed process getting fire on the ground, but that's to ensure safety, and that's what makes it different from a wildfire. So some of the uses of prescribed fire that in our state and in the Southeast, there's lots of benefits for using fire as a tool on the landscape. And there's 7 listed below, and I'll just briefly run through them. The first one is removing hazardous fuels. The reality is that a lot of our natural areas here in Kentucky are shaped by millions of years of fire. And after European settlement, we started suppressing that fire because we've got a lot of people and homes and structures to protect now. And so over time, that fuel builds up on the forest floor because it's not being burned routinely and can cause really damaging and catastrophic wildfires if it's not taken care of. So with the Kentucky Division of Forestry, we primarily use prescribed fire to fight wildfire, prevent wildfire, which is kind of a fun concept if you're new to the world of fire, is fighting fire with fire, but that's what we do. It's great for forest health and returning nutrients into the soil. It can be used for economic gain. There's a lot of species in the Southeast, particularly pine, that depend on fire at some point in their life cycle. And so it can help with pine stands. Community risk reduction, we talked about that a little bit. Aesthetics, opening up the mid-story, having more room for forest range and brush management, and for wildlife habitat improvement. And so the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council, as part of their education and networking initiatives, we are offering 4 events this year, educational events in the form of 2 field trips and 2 webinars. The dates are listed on this flyer to the right. These are a great opportunity to work with other fire practitioners in the state and also visit sites that have been managed with prescribed fire. Kind of tour to see, what other agencies are doing and kind of all. Registration is required too, but the webinars are free to anyone who's interested, and we encourage fire practitioners, landowners that are interested in using this tool on their site, or just conservation enthusiasts or students. Anyone is welcome. The field trips are for members only. However, it's only $10 trip fee goes towards us being able on these events and keep the Fire Council membership for the entire year, which means you are free to go on both field trips. Absolutely free. So a little bit more information about these next week in Knox military installation. So that's really exciting. The natural resources, not a lot of people get clearance over there to see some of their habitat restoration work, how they've been using fire and in some of their glades and woodlands to open up those habitats. And there are some rare species there that this work is going to help benefit. So that's really exciting. Our next one that we have is prescribed fire to maintain habitat for monarch butterflies and other pollinators. And this is hosted in September at Perryville in Boyle County. And this one's a fun one because Perryville is one of the largest connected grassland habitats that we have here in Kentucky. And it's a very important stopping point for the monarch butterfly on their migration south to Mexico in that fall time. And so we've planned this field trip around that time of year so that we can not only look at the habitat that we use prescribed fire to maintain for all these pollinator species, but as well as hopefully see some monarchs, and we might be able to include some tagging, monarch tagging into that event as well. I will be leading that one. I was with the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves previously before jumping over to the Kentucky Division of Forestry, but we all work together very closely still. And then our two webinars that we're offering, we've got some really exciting things: making a case for late growing season prescribed fire. Fire is used during different times of year to achieve different outcomes, and there's not a lot of research or use on doing prescribed fire during the late growing season. It's fairly new to our state. There is research being done, and Jared Brook from Purdue University is going to speak to us on some of his projects and research and findings from that. So that's really exciting. And then lastly, we have using fire to conserve Kentucky's natural heritage. The Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves is tasked with monitoring and restoring habitat for rare and endangered plant species in the state. And non-coincidentally, a lot of the rare species that we have here in the state kind of coincide and occur in areas that were historically burned a lot in wildfire, prehistoric European settlement. So that's really cool how they're using fire as a tool to kind of recreate that disturbance to have some of these rare plant communities thrive again. So those are our offerings. We really hope that you come out and join us. It's going to be a good time. And if we get really good attendance and participation this year, we'll maybe add on more. This is the first year that we're doing this. So there's lots of people signed up already, and we're welcome to take more. A little bit more of things that we offer just in general, kind of annually as the Fire Council, is we kind of are the training authority for the state in prescribed fire. We offer the Kentucky Certified Burn Boss class, which gives you the skills and ability to conduct prescribed fire outside of the Kentucky Division of Forestry's burn restrictions. We've got 8-hour landowner course, which is geared towards landowners that want to start burning on their property for the various reasons. And it's a certification that also helps you serve as a crew member on some of our burns, which is kind of exciting if you want some more hands-on experience. And then a new thing that we've just added is Learn and Burns, and it gives the people that have completed the 8-hour landowner course an opportunity, a hands-on experience to conduct a real prescribed fire, an educational fire on usually a private owned land. So that's pretty exciting too. Here's just a little bit information about how many people we've trained and certified up to date. It's quite a few, and off to your right, you'll see that the 8-hour landowner course and training is being offered 3 times this fall. So if you have information on that, I'll give you a contact at the end. And again, come on out to our field trips. Please join our webinars. And if you'd like to even further be involved with us, we have 4 committees on the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council, and these are the committee chairs, and you're welcome to reach out to them individually and see how you can get involved. Here's a slide just showing the partners in the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council. And with that, I will take any questions.
Well, thank you, Maddie. We greatly appreciate you joining us and being on there. It's really interesting how fire can actually help if done correctly. And I thought that it's always fascinated me that something that burns, that you naturally have I think a negative idea in your mind actually can be a positive if done correctly.
that's, like I said, that's something is an interesting thing to wrap your head around. But that's kind of what we're here for. I'm the committee chair of the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council, and I'd like to help spread the positive news of fire. And if it's used correctly, it can be a really great thing. And so
Well,
that's
Maddie,
what I'm here for.
I would say, you can use From the Woods Today as that platform as much as possible. I get a chance to work with woodland owners across Kentucky, and it's something that's on a lot of their minds right now. How could fire be used in the management of my property? When's it appropriate? When's it not? So we still have a lot of education and awareness we have to do here in the state, but I'm just delighted to have you on board and part of the team leading that outreach effort. So like I said, anything that we can do from here, From the Woods Today, please let us know. We want to help you get the word out.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to be here and happy to work with y'all in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, indeed. We'll have you back for sure.
Definitely.
Good
So I
stuff.
told you at the beginning it was going to be a really interesting show. And it
Yeah,
was.
covered a lot of ground. We learned about the latest that we can learn about with carbon markets. And again, thankful to have Dr. Muller keeping up with that, because that is an ever evolving kind of shifting landscape. And, if people are going to be signing up for 1, 2, 10, 20, 30 years, they need to know what they're getting into, right?
Exactly.
So big thanks to Dr. Muller for that. Also thank Laurie Thomas for another tree of the week. We got to learn about cherry bark oak, one of our new oaks, which is really cool. She, again, remind everybody, we've got tons of those on our website if you're interested in those. And then we got to hear about the Prescribed Fire Council, some of those trainings from Maddie, a brand new guest that we'll be having here. But again, thank you all for being here, because really this program is about you all. It's about our woodland owners and our natural resource professionals across Kentucky who are trying to help people be good stewards of the property. So thank you all for what you all do. And if you know people that would be interested in this type of content, please let them know about From the Woods Today.
Yes, you can definitely go to fromthewoodstoday.com, and there's a little survey on there. You can fill out for us. And if you had a show idea, we've used show ideas. Actually, next week, we're going to have one on soils. And so that was a question that was brought to our attention. So here you go. Next
There
week.
you go.
So you never know when
inspired, right?
Yes, you never know when we might do a show on what you asked us to do. So make sure you join us next week at 11 o'clock. Until then, take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
From the woods today.